I'd like to give an overview of where the company is at currently. It's a very exciting time for Proteomics International, and we're very pleased with our progress over the last couple of years. So I'll walk through the presentation. It's intended to be informal, so if you've got any questions as we go, happy to take them, and obviously happy to take questions at the end as well. As a company, we're specializing in the area of predictive diagnostics, and we focus in three areas as an organization. Our lead product for diagnostics, PromarkerD, our developing pipeline of products in the diagnostics area, and then the bioanalytical services. At a headline, we have a predictive test for the identification of diabetic kidney disease. It's patented, it's cost effective, it's easy to use, it's world-leading technology in its own right. We also have additional tests coming through in the pipeline, a range of areas. We look at diseases with significant unmet medical need, and I'll give an example under endometriosis later, but a number of other areas where there's an opportunity for us to invest in our technology and develop new diagnostic tests across lung disease in particular. In the bioanalytical services area, we have very strong demand from industry for the specialist work that we do. It is a growing business for us. It's not the priority of the company, but we have invested over $4 million in partnership with state and federal governments and working with the University of Western Australia to expand the facility and to install the latest equipment. So that gives us an opportunity not only to provide the specialist analytical services, but to also ensure that our capability in the area of developing new diagnostic tests is at the forefront of the area, and that we have the latest equipment so that we can come up with new and novel biomarkers. So that's a nice way of looking at how we do the business. That investment into the facility supports both the bioanalytical side and the research and development and the moving forward of our diagnostic tests. So that complementary operation helps us develop the company. The income from the analytical services also helps to reduce that cash burn. And so that's allowed us to run a very tight operation for the last several years. But I'm very pleased to say that in October, we raised $6 million in a placement. It was very exciting on that day. We got an awful lot of interest. We did open at 7 in the morning with a view that we'd be closing in 12 o'clock the next day. By 11:30 that morning, we'd already had a significant interest in taking shares in the company, which is obviously exciting for all of us in the room because it now allows us to really develop the company, and we have a range of new institutional investors have come in, including from overseas. And so the main focus now as an organization is to implement our growth strategies that we have with a view to taking on new expertise where we see appropriate, including as we need to, strengthening senior management and the board, as well as putting in extra resources at an operational level. And I'll talk more on that as we go. On the right-hand side of the screen, in a snapshot, we're still a relatively tightly held company with 100 million shares on offer, market capitalization now over $50 million, which is very exciting from where we came. I was remarking the other day, we'll be 20 years old in February 2020. And that was when we started then, that was a $2 company. So it's come a long way, and that's a nice story. So as I said, we have a very healthy cash balance now, and that will ensure that we're fully funded for all activities of the foreseeable future and the runway that we believe that we require. And it's nice to see that the share price is starting to reflect some of the value that we see in the company. Of course, we believe it's still got a long way to run to catch up with the true value of what Proteomics International is currently worth and what it will continue to be worth as we grow in value. In terms of the directors and the management board, I normally include this at the end of a presentation because it's a little bit dry, but it's worth emphasizing we have a very skilled management team, a lot of experience across industry, working with big pharma. Roger, who you briefly saw, we'll try and reintroduce him at the end so you can have a bit more of a chat if required. Roger's worked with Novo Nordisk, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world who specialize in diabetes. And we also have Terry Sweet and Paul House, both experienced in the company SGS, which is a major testing company in the range of analytical areas, also broad expertise across business management, and they certainly keep me on my toes in terms of discussing where we're going as an organization and reminding that the primary objective is to generate shareholder value, as well as do the innovative things that we see will eventually generate longer term shareholder value. We also have a number of people in the room who are some of the senior managers, so I encourage you afterwards to talk to the team, and we will hang around and over tea or coffee and hear about some of the stories about what we do. So I'll go more into high level aspects of the technology. The Promarker platform, as we call it, is about identifying a unique protein fingerprint, and that fingerprint lets us identify people who are going to get a disease or have a disease versus those that do not. So that's the basic principle. We look for a fingerprint that we can find in a biological system, normally a blood sample. The excitement that we have now is around our test, PromarkerD, the predictive test for diabetic kidney disease. We put some boxes on the front because we do have the kit now. It exists. It's being shipped to different places in the world. That will really strengthen in earnest through 2021. But it's nice to have got to the position now where we have a product which is something we can hold in our hands. In terms of how we've built PromarkerD into a revenue-ready proposition, what we've highlighted here is where the product is at. We all know that diabetes is a major problem globally. It's clearly an enormous market, and it's not just the number of people with diabetes, but it's the number of people with complications such as diabetic kidney disease. But what's really changed for us as an organization over the last 12 months is the achievements that we've had in terms of revalidating the test, getting independent results, working with big pharma, with Janssen, with large independent studies, shows we've got great statistical performance of the test. It does what we say it does, but that's been validated by others. We have this simple technology platform, which is now easy to use. Any lab in the world can run this kit. We've also got regulatory approval for the test in Europe. So with those achievements ourselves, an easy to use product, further validation of the statistics, and an easy to use product, those three achievements through 2019, 2020 have been really key to advancing the use of PromarkerD globally, and it's really exciting to see how that's developed, and we look forward to people using the test in the near term. An important point here, therapeutic treatments available. This was also a game changer, which is not of our making, but our partner, Janssen Pharmaceuticals, were the first company globally to come up with a new treatment for diabetic kidney disease. This was announced in September of last year, the first new drug for treating diabetic kidney disease in 20 years. And so the excitement there is not only can we predict who's going to get sick, but now there's some therapies for these people so that we can actually do something about it as a community. And then the key areas that we will be pursuing, the ones we have not yet completed, reimbursement, where this relates to insurance and Medicare codes in the US, and more health-based systems here in Australia. This is something that we're working on actively, and I'll talk more on that later. Obviously, regulatory approvals, we have the CE mark for Europe, but there's a number of others that we require globally, and that will be the primary focus of the additional resources that we now have. Recapping on why we're looking at diabetes, over 400 million people worldwide today. We're going to be close to 700 million people in another 25 years' time. And there's a constant pipeline of people with diabetes who end up with the complications. And so not only have we got more people getting diabetes, we've got more people with diabetes developing kidney disease. And unfortunately, people with kidney disease or other complications such as heart disease dying from these complications. So there's an unfortunate continuous pipeline of people coming through the system that we can help with a test like PromarkerD. The market size I've put here as well because it emphasizes We're working in a very hot space. The in vitro diagnostic market, the IVD market, is growing rapidly. The proteomics market, in which we specialize, is also growing rapidly. And these are both being driven by this interest in personalized medicine, the idea to be able to look at these fingerprints in an individual and work out why one person or one system is different from another. So they're really high growth areas, and we're proud to say that we're at the forefront of these areas. And why diabetic kidney disease? Well, 1 in 3 people with diabetes have chronic kidney disease today. We can still help those people who've got the disease, because potentially we can identify early stage people and stop them getting into the late stage. There's obviously still 2/3 of that population haven't got kidney disease yet, and there's a high risk that they will develop it over time. And the reason people develop it is because it's a silent killer. There are no early symptoms, meaning your kidney is a very efficient organ, and their kidney function can be lost. You can drop down to 15 to 20% of normal, and at that point you'll start to feel a bit lethargic. But also, I'm afraid at that point the only options are dialysis or kidney transplant. There is no way of restoring the kidney, so whatever function you lose, you never get back. So that's where the current standard of care is failing. The tests have been around for up to 50 years, but they don't actually predict who's going to get sick. They're not very sensitive, so they're not even picking up with people who are sick. They're certainly not detecting those who will become sick. And dialysis is clearly a very expensive exercise, over $100,000 in Australia. So what we've developed is a predictive test that we can test these people with diabetes with a view to determining the onset of disease before clinical symptoms appear. And then it's common sense that if you can detect early, you can intervene early, you're going to get better outcomes for the patient, for the healthcare system. You're going to save money, you're going to improve quality of life, and slow or stop the onset of disease. The technology that we use is broad. For those of you who visited us before, and those of you who haven't, you're welcome to come and see the laboratories afterwards. We have some very sophisticated instrumentation upstairs that lets us do this research and development. That technology allowed us to develop PromarkerD. It's not for all clinical pathology labs to use, though it is sophisticated. It does require a high level of expertise, and we have one of the best teams in the world sitting in this room today. What we've done, though, is we've ported that technology onto traditional systems, what's called an immunoassay, and that technology is very easy to use by any lab, as I've said, and that goes in a variety of flavors as a kit form, which are the boxes sitting on the table. A laboratory developed test is how it would run immediately in the US, where we can effectively just send the reagents to that lab. It would follow a recipe and set the method up, hence the laboratory developed test, and that can be run immediately. And that's a way of early adoption of a test. And then the same reagents can also be put onto automated platforms, and that's exciting for us as well, because it means that we've got every base covered in terms of rolling out the test. So as I said earlier, it's cost effective, it's easy to use. We have this regulatory approval, and CE mark was a strategic decision because it doesn't just allow us into Europe, but a number of countries worldwide use CE mark as their benchmark. And so if you have CE mark, you're allowed to sell your test into those jurisdictions. It does mean that we're now in commercial discussions with a range of pathology labs globally, but also diagnostics manufacturers who would supply the reagents or the automated immunoassays, and pharmaceutical companies who could be a user of the test. How the test works in the clinic: it's a scoring system. We rank people who are going to get sick. What you're seeing there is traffic lights, green, orange, or red. To get there, we do a simple blood test. It measures 3 markers that are found in the blood. That's why there's 3 boxes, because we measure each marker independently. We then combine that with some very simple clinical parameters, which would be measured in every diabetic: cholesterol would be measured for heart disease, EGFR, the estimated glomerular filtration rate, is the existing diagnostic test for the disease. And then adding in age, those 6 variables go into our algorithm, and that generates this risk score. And if we're able to put somebody into the low risk category, then we can be very sure with our modeling and the data that we published that that person has up to a 98% rule out rate of developing diabetic kidney disease within the next 4 years. So that's very important as a starting point, because that means that those patients do not need to be monitored closely. They do not need to go onto these new expensive drugs. Equally, if we can put somebody in the high-risk category, because we know that in the next 4 years they're going to develop diabetic kidney disease, then they're the people we want to treat. And in our studies, we've been able to detect 86% of the people who went on to develop that chronic kidney disease within 4 years' time. So those are the people in that high-risk category who you do need to get onto these new therapies. So this is why it's a very exciting time. And if you're a physician and the interest we're getting from key opinion leaders worldwide, they can join the dots. They've been looking at patients for several years saying, well, they've got diabetes, but we don't know what to do next. We keep telling them to take their medicine, but they're still getting diabetic kidney disease. Now they've got a drug which is being approved globally, and there's a number coming through from other pharmaceutical companies. So they could give every patient this drug because it's already been shown to stop diabetic kidney disease, but it's a drug that it's 10 times to 100 times more expensive than the current drug, and it does have a small number of side effects. So you don't want to put every patient on this drug. And so this idea of stratifying and being able to work out who's in this high-risk category is very important. So that's how PromarkerD is going to work in the clinic. So that's the current work that we're doing with Janssen Pharmaceuticals at the moment. So that's actually the next slide. So the collaboration with Janssen is to look at how PromarkerD can do exactly what Conrad has asked there. How can we monitor the change in a patient over time once they're on the drug? So stage 1, which we've completed and published, that was a completed clinical trial that Janssen have already finished. So they've tested their patients, they've monitored them over 4 years. They've got literally thousands of samples around the world, and these patients have completed the trial. So they've either been in the placebo arm or they've been in the drug arm. But the trial is known as Canvas. It was actually looking at the ability of their drug, canagliflozin, to detect and to see if they could protect those who would develop cardiovascular disease. But they did see benefits of kidney disease, which is why they then got in touch with us and said, well, what can your test do? So this is the genesis of the project. And what we've shown in stage 1 is that if we measure those people at year 0, we can predict which ones would be in that high-risk category, and they're the ones who would be developing kidney disease 4 years later. So that was data that we already knew from studies we've done in Australia, but this is very important globally to be able to publish these results at the American Diabetes Association and in the Journal of Diabetes Complications. Now, I should emphasize that there's still more work to be done there. There is an enormous amount of data from these thousands of samples followed over years, with all the clinical information that comes along from studying people in clinical trials. It's very, as you would expect, meticulously detailed. So we have an awful lot of information on their first sign of kidney disease, their first sign of heart disease, how they went in during the trial, how they went after the trial. And it's keeping our statistical team busy, along with the Janssen team, to do it in additional statistical modeling of the disease and the PromarkerD scores, or I should say the different disease outcomes and the PromarkerD scores, because there's the ability here to look for PromarkerD. What else can we do with the test? So that's all baseline. And then stage 2 is about how response changes over time. So now we're measuring PromarkerD score of people who've been on the drug for 4 years, and that's exactly the question that you were looking at. This information we're working towards understanding the statistics now. We're a little bit behind where we hope to be for 2 reasons. One is there's an awful lot of data here, and it's more involved than the statistical teams initially anticipated with the plan. There were also some slowing down as a consequence of COVID-19 in terms of being able to get the project moving through. We had hoped to have these results by this time, but it will now be early 2021. And we're very pleased that Janssen suggested that we would extend the collaboration for another year so that we can fully ascertain all the details in the studies. That will be that's the collaboration extended to there, but we would anticipate the results in the first half of the year at different levels. And I'll introduce here the term of a complementary diagnostic. This is the idea that we can have a test that sits alongside a drug and that the test helps understand who should take the drug. Just briefly, in terms of the route to market, we've already touched on these in the other slides between the laboratory developed tests, that fast regulatory pathway building demand for advanced markets like the US. It's not available in Australia. We don't have the same path. In Europe, we will go down the right-hand side path, the in vitro diagnostic test, where we have the kit version available, and that's rollouts commenced with that licensing distribution agreement that we announced in Italy last month. But the example here for the out-licensing models and how we as a company will make money out of the test and get the test adopted. We can provide the product or a license to the lab can run the test, they send the data to our PromarkerD hub, a remote server, that calculates a risk score as per that traffic light system. Those reports are automatically generated and sent back to the laboratory. And then we would receive a royalty on every test sold in that 5 to 15% range. So from our perspective, it's relatively low cost. We provide the kit, that gets paid for as we distribute it, and then we make money on every test sold by the laboratory after that. So in terms of the market then that we're looking at, the opportunity, what we've shown here is the markets where we already have patent protection or a couple of pending with India. But we look at the size there of the market, focusing on the US as an example, 31 million people in the US have diabetes today. If we could perform the test once per year, on average, as we alluded to in the Promarker in the clinic, those at high risk might be tested more often, those at low risk might be tested less often. Test price in that $55 to $150 range, that's based on engagement with the market stakeholders in terms of insurance companies, diagnostics providers and clinicians as to what we feel is a realistic price point. And then we're going to take a royalty of 5 to 15%. So potentially $150 test and we get 10% of each one. If there's 31 million people requiring testing, then that number gets very large very quickly. I should stress that the patent portfolio is considerable. It allows us to do a number of things beyond just diabetic kidney disease. We do have coverage for other forms of chronic kidney disease, which is something that we will be advancing in future periods to look at how we can broaden the disease application of the test. And I should say kidney disease broadly, there are a range of causes. Approximately half the kidney disease on the planet is caused by diabetes. So that's already, as we said, the 480 million people to look for. We could potentially extend the test further. The recent agreements really exemplify what we can do with the new version of the test, the easy to use kit, more traditional distribution model, both at Medical Horizons in Italy and Zotal in Israel have got great track records of rolling out novel technology, new tests. They position themselves at the forefront of their areas so that they can bring in technology. This Zotal in particular, they've been around for over 20 years as an organization, but they've really focused on the personalized medicine aspect now. So we have a kit that we can provide to their network. We're engaging with key opinion leaders in the countries so that they're going to run early studies in major hospitals to show what the test can do. And we envisage, particularly in Italy, sales early in 2021. The test has already been approved by the Italian Ministry of Health. We're clearly not going to stop there. These are easy markets, low-hanging fruit, but as we've said, the test is revenue ready, so there's a number of markets globally that we can potentially enter, and we're having conversations across our primary targets, which are Europe, the US, and Asia. Beyond PromarkerD, we have a rich pipeline of new technology and new potential diagnostic tests in areas of significant unmet medical need. The reason that we look at these different markets is because we, as an organization, have identified, or we have been contacted by key opinion leaders in these different disease areas to say, there's not a good way of diagnosing this problem at the moment. How can we improve it? And what we're showing here, endometriosis is an example. We've advanced slightly in that area this year. I should say, for all of the projects that they have, we have struggled in terms of getting access to additional samples to do some of these clinical studies. As you'd expect in a time of pandemic where people are not allowed to talk and, or to, I should say, to mix, then clinical studies is not an area which advances quickly. But we have made some great progress behind the scenes, and we have managed to move some of these projects forward slightly. So the different areas where the changes since we last presented this, where the dark line is, for example, in asthma, we've now completed the discovery work. That's in a statistical analysis stage at the moment to determine to what extent we've been able to detect new biomarkers there. Diabetic retinopathy is also progressing well. The esophageal cancer, that was an interesting collaboration opportunity that came to us through the Queensland Institute for Medical Research, the Berkhofer Institute. They have already done proof of concept work. That test is something that fits very well into our pipeline, a very similar workflow to how we analyze PromarkerD. So the objective for both the esophageal cancer and where we're at with endometriosis at the moment is we take the test, and then we do everything we can to prove that it works, effectively try and break it. So we run multiple samples, we do a whole range of shelf life stability studies to see what needs to happen to a sample for it to not give us the result that we expect. The idea of just finding a biomarker and saying, well, eureka, I found something, this is going to be a new diagnostic test. The industry has failed on that for decades, because if you look in the literature for protein biomarker, you will see hundreds, if not thousands, of examples. The reason that there are very few tests like PromarkerD on the market is because most of those results are not reproducible in the real world. And if you try to run it in a second laboratory, or even run the same sample 3 months later, you may get a different result. So what we're doing now in terms of the workflow and what we've learned from PromarkerD is the importance of taking the initial test and then doing all these clinical robustness and analytical validity studies to prove that the test works. And I'm pleased to say that the endometriosis test has just completed that now, and the data looks very strong. And so the next stage there will be advancing that test. So a little bit more on endometriosis. Why are we working on that? Most of the gentlemen in the room may not know too much about it unless you've got a partner or a female family member who's been affected by it. But it is, I understand, a very debilitating disease, tissue growing out of the uterus, very painful, very difficult to diagnose. I think it's shameful that average diagnosis is over 7 years from first presenting symptoms. So clearly there's a significant unmet medical need. It affects a very large number of people as well. I think it's embarrassing from a medical community perspective. And so we're very pleased that we were able to identify these new markers. We have filed a patent on what we found, and we are in late stage discussions with some large consortia here in Australia to work with them to do the large-scale clinical study to validate these markers. And if all goes to plan, then we should have some things we can say about that formally early in 2021. And then in terms of developing that from what will then be a clinically validated test to bringing it to market, we see that as something that could happen very quickly based on experience with PromarkerD. That product could be available in as little as 1 to 2 years. On the other side of the business, I've already touched on this in a little bit of detail. As you see, we're in a fantastic building, and the facilities here are second to none globally. The facilities in our laboratories are world-class. We're very pleased to be able to be associated with the Perkins and to work closely with them in a number of areas. And what we've been able to develop here is world-first level of sophistication and accreditation. Our 17025 badge relates to the ability to deliver high-quality results on a regular basis, and that's key for our partners in the pharmaceutical industry, where we do a range of quality control testing for them in an area of drugs called biosimilars and biologics, through to simple things like milk or the A2 milk in Western Australia. That comes through our lab to be tested, not literally all of it, but obviously a sample in terms of being able to prove that that milk contains the A2 protein and is not contaminated with the A1 protein. And that very simple difference, that fingerprint, we use exactly that same strategy for very complex samples like a blood sample. We also work with linear clinical trials, which is also based in this building on pharmacokinetic testing. So this relates to monitoring how a drug is processed by the body during a clinical trial. So not only do clinical trials assess whether the drug works on the patient, but the objective of the testing that we do is to see how the patient affects the drug, meaning how the drug levels change over time. And so that we can monitor that, and that gives information on the importance of dosing. And these partnerships are all key for the overall structure of the company in terms of the different areas and cross-fertilization that's possible from one area into the other. And it's, for example, in some of the companies we work with in the biologics and biosimilars area, very big developers of drugs in India. It's a very big market. They're excellent at developing these generic drugs. There are some very large pharmaceutical companies in that part of the world. They are always interested in developing new products, and they present opportunities for us, for example, to look at PromarkerD and how a diagnostic test could become part of their portfolio. So they're longer term objectives, but just exemplify again what we can do. In the last 10 minutes, I'll just cover off on where we've got to in the last couple of years and where we're going. So the timeline and the upcoming milestones. What I wanted to emphasize here is the 2-year time frame on the left-hand side of the number of things that we've done, which I alluded to at the beginning. But from entering the collaboration with Janssen in November 2018, taking the decision to develop the simple form of the PromarkerD immunoassay, then going through the steps to show that that works, getting the additional statistical data, getting the CE mark for the different versions of the test, developing the algorithm and the software hub. All of these things require different levels of accreditation and sophistication to put them in place. Along the way, we're still developing other tests in the area of endometriosis, as I said, and looking at other opportunities as they come along. Until last month, that we've been able to do these initial distribution agreements for the test. So again, to emphasize, we've gone from a very sophisticated test that we could run, but very few other groups globally were able to do so easily, to a simple to use test, which is available to anybody worldwide, that is CE marked and that has been independently validated in the data by one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies in Janssen. So that's what we said we were going to do 2 years ago. That's what we've done. And then the next period is going to be about how we run with that. So further information with Janssen will be first cab off the rank, but additional results for our other biomarker and Promarker pipeline products, how we're advancing those. And then clearly the rest of it is all around PromarkerD. How do we do more licensing deals? How do we get insurance and reimbursement coverage in different jurisdictions, subsequent regulatory approvals? And obviously we're looking forward to a growing sales revenue in the year ahead. So in terms of the inflection points that we see for the value of the company, to emphasize, we believe that Proteomics International Laboratories represents an exceptional opportunity. We have a cutting-edge technology. It's proven and it's in-house. So we use this to develop new technology ourselves. We're not like some of our peers where we in-license and and don't know what we're talking about. Have a key opinion leader or advisory panel because the team in the office don't actually know what it is that they're running. We know this, and we are experts in what we do. We've got a test which is de-risked, it's patented, it's in the rollout phase. It's a very scalable model with high margins. And we do have a deepening pipeline. So the catalysts for this year will be, as I said, around licensing deals in major jurisdictions in the diagnostics, pharmaceutical partners or service providers like a Sonic or a Quest. Working with Janssen, the potential for some interesting, exciting data in the different stages there. First sales, insurance and reimbursement, key trigger points for value creation in different areas, and then regulatory approvals, and not forgetting the potential to generate new business from the analytical side across the range of areas where we specialize. And as I said, the new tests coming through. So with that, I will pause and thank you for your attention and happy to take further questions.